Hello! Welcome to part 4 of the Fire Emblem Sync Marathon. This part, we'll be looking at the many side objectives used throughout the series, playing through these chapters from each mainline title for reference. Some highlights will be Mystery of the Emblem, which gets a long-awaited redemption arc, Shadow Dragon, where Lena leads the charge into battle to protect her brother, and Shadows of Valentia, where Mage Faye lays siege to Sophia Castle, and we take on the famously difficult Draco Shield challenge. Thracia will also be particularly interesting, as I struggle through our first escape maps, and the new powerful mage sweeps everything. I define a side objective as any game element directly designed to give the player a challenge unrelated to achieving the victory condition. Most commonly, this has taken the form of villages, chests, and recruitable characters, but there are a variety of other forms that optional challenges have taken over the years. My qualifiers for a well-designed side objective are: does the challenge provide an opportunity to engage in the game more strategically? Is the player appropriately rewarded for surpassing the challenge? And does the game present a variety of challenges? With this in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Marth has finally made it to Orleans, but before he can meet up with his allies, he first has to seize the southern castle, guarded by the first group of enemy cavaliers. In addition to a village in the west and center of the map, a unique side objective of this map is to recruit the enemy cavalier, Matchus. To do so, Lena needs to safely reach Matchus and talk to him, and the two need to be prepared to survive the following enemy phase, as Matchus charges at you with two other cavaliers. Like previous chapters, I sent most of my army west to handle this main group, while I had Kain go on a solo mission in the northeast. Kain's actually gotten the stats needed to one-round the fighters, so this chapter goes very well for him, killing the fighters on enemy phase and the hunter on the following player phase. Mirroring Kain, I sent Abel out front in the west, equipping the javelin. This let him counterattack the enemy bowmen, setting up kills for Marth and Sheeta. In doing so, I placed Marth on the fort, giving him a push and avoid that let him dodge the incoming cavaliers. Apparently, enemies in FE1 will always target Marth if possible, which feels a little mean, but is definitely exploitable, as demonstrated in this match's recruitment. Lena was just barely able to reach him the turn after he approached, but I had also baited over the knight and archers guarding the bridge, so I was left with many enemies but not a lot of firepower to kill them all. This should make for quite the tense turn, in which having Lena be around a horde of enemies would encourage you to put together several calculated player phase kills. Knowing about the Marth AI, some of the tension went away, but I still took it upon myself to get as many kills as possible. Theoretically, our new unit's Matchus should have been useful in this, but one look at Matchus shows that he's nothing special. I don't want to be mean, but he basically has the same stats as the generic enemy cavaliers. Between this and my poor experience with him in Mystery of the Emblem, I feel it's fair to say that Matchus will not be seeing much action this run. Now, one aspect of this turn that was actually tense was saving the central village. In FE1, villages that give gold, items, or even units seem to be commonplace, as well as enemy thieves that destroy them upon reaching them. While it's pretty easy to defeat the thieves before they reach the village if you're already playing at a pace where Marth is moving full move every turn, like I am, I appreciate that this threatened village approach to a side objective gives a gentle push and pace, making the player think not just how to defeat the enemies, but how to do so in a more limited number of turns. Even for me though, I felt this instance of a threatened village was interesting, as I did not realize that thieves could cross water, forcing me to quickly improvise a strategy that facilitated Sheeta flying across the river to protect the village, made tricky by the enemy archers on the other side. I ultimately got it, and I'm glad I did, because in visiting the village, we recruit our first mage, Merrick. His stats are fairly low at level 1, but his spell Excalibur seems to be insane, letting him kill the boss mostly on his own. As for the rest of the ending, I had Lena wait at the bridge in the south, letting the knight attack her a few times for minimal XP gain, with Riff safely healing her from the other side of the bridge. I wouldn't exactly call this a side objective, as there was no challenge in reaching it, but I had Abel take on our first arena battle at the end, in which we can wager gold to fight enemies. I'll be honest, I was completely willing to let Abel die if he couldn't even beat one random enemy in the arena, and he came embarrassingly close to losing, but with a lucky dodge, he survived and earned us a little gold. Because, you know, we needed more of that. But yeah, to speak to the FE1 arena, never again. After Kain gets the final night kill, Marth seizes, and we are set to move on to the northern castle, where some cavalry that are slightly more important than matches await. Gaiden. Alm's group is within reach of Sophia Castle, but before we can reclaim it from Regalian forces, we must gather the rest of the Deliverance, who are waiting within our second dungeon. We are greeted by Python, who doesn't quite join us yet, but at least is kind enough to warn us about the incoming monster encounter. XP gain is so slow in Gaiden that no one is really close to promotion, so I mostly just moved everyone forward and spread out the combat. My main concern is getting Silk to level 7, but she's still a few levels away, and she misses quite a lot here, so she will not have it for the upcoming battle. I couldn't really move Silk forward and let her slowly take out all the enemies herself, because the map is so small that the other units can barely get outside of enemy range, and the enemies have so much HP that this would have taken a very long time. Gray could have made quick work of the enemies with the Bolt Sword, but in taking a couple extra turns, I at least got a couple kills on the likes of Silk, Cliff, and Luca. In the Shrine Room, we find Deliverance members Clive and Force. Clive steps down from his role as leader of the Deliverance and passes it down to Alm. Clive will play a solid role in their army because, as we've seen, enemy starting positions are quite far away in Gaiden, and his high movement as a cavalier, paired with decent defenses, will help us speed up the pace of battles. Force, on the other hand, is a soldier without great movement or base combat, and I will not be focusing on him, in favor of training other units I like, such as Luca. As for Fountains, we have the option of attack and defense. With so many units having the promise of getting class bases relatively soon, I decided to just pour everything into Silk, to further assist her journey to Warp, and potentially pull off some sweeps even past then. On our way out of the dungeon, we now get to recruit Python. He's pretty comparable to our archer Robin, just being a little slower. Like Force, he's pretty far from level 7, so I'll mostly just be using him offhandedly, and get him to promotion whenever the time arises. With our new forces, Alm finally sets out to retake Sophia Castle. Like most Gaiden maps, our victory condition is to rout, but there's a suspiciously strong Baron, Dozer, who's wielding a Draco Shield that further boosts his defenses to insane heights. The other boss is Slater, a paladin that's pretty tough, but actually reasonable to defeat. There are a few paths you can take to reach them, with the fastest option for many units being just walking through the path that has archers shooting down at you, then cutting through the middle. The couple units that start in the west can just wrap around that way, with Claire flying over the wall and opening the door from behind. By turn 5, I finally get to start fighting Slater, with Clive in the lead. I'll go ahead and spoil that while Dozer's Draco Shield is droppable, he's tied to Slater, and that if you defeat one, the other will be removed from the map. Knowing this, I vaguely had it in mind to keep Slater alive while fighting him here, as you can manipulate their healing AI to ensure he doesn't die before you can defeat Dozer. As such, the Draco Shield is now a side objective, requiring a thought-out strategy that goes beyond just routing. So while I'm slowly dealing with the archers with Robin and Cliff, I'm also having to find a way to weaken Slater so he'll go back to the healing tile, all while not letting any of my units die. To further add to the challenge, hit rates are frustratingly low, and I do feel I got particularly unlucky with misses. Slater and the archers held out for a long time, and I would have had to reset had Silk not gotten that defense fountain. I accidentally trapped Slater when he finally would have gotten healing AI, and thinking ahead to the insane fight that is defeating Dozer, I gave up on the side objective and just killed Slater. We'll get another opportunity in Shadows of Valentia, but for now, defeating Dozer while keeping Slater alive felt pretty unreasonable with my current team of unpromoted units. While finishing up with Slater, Clive pushed even further forward, chasing after an archer that got healing AI, while incidentally putting himself in range of basically every enemy, including a group of cavaliers, more archers, and our first arcanist. The cavaliers and archers body blocked each other, but the arcanist's magic still hit Clive hard, and he wasn't able to hold that central choke point for any longer. Thankfully, our new soldier, Force, had the bulk to take a couple turns at the choke point, giving time for the rest of the army to finish Slater and catch up. With Silk at 1 HP from the archer fight, I had no source of healing, and everyone got very low on HP, but between Gray, Cliff, and Tobin's ranged attacks, I was able to take out the Arcanist, with the enemy archers attacking into Gray at 2 range for some reason, who took them out with the Bolt Sword. Strange, but I'm not complaining. Once Silk healed herself back up with Nosferatu and healed everyone else, cleaning up the assortment of remaining enemies was fairly simple. We may not have gotten the Draco Shield, and while I think the challenge it presents is actually quite unique, I have many issues with it. For one, Gaiden does not telegraph it well at all, and it's almost certain that new players will just defeat Slater first. It's also unreasonably challenging without grinding, and even then, I don't know how you would pull it off with the limited options that Gaiden gives you to handle it, specifically thinking about Silk being your only source of healing. I also take issue in this being one of the few side objectives that Gaiden includes at all, not even featuring villages or chests. Every battle features the challenge of defeating various enemy groups, but the game doesn't present opportunities to engage in the battles using a certain, more thought-out strategy. A consequence of this is that players have to be able to surpass its most challenging maps to even complete the game, and as we'll see later on, this can be very frustrating. In theory, I actually like the Draco Shield side objective here, as a demonstration of challenges that involve defeating difficult enemy formations, rather than encouraging a faster pace, but I don't think it's executed in a very accessible way, and being the only side objective is a pretty bad look for the game, in my opinion. With Sophia Castle back under our control, we're all set to explore the castle and conclude our time in Act 1. Just kidding! I actually take us back to the Deliverance headquarters for one last encounter. Some of our units got really close to their level goals in the last battle, but I'd like to have them available right away the next time we control Alm's group, as to avoid tedious backtracking. Here, I take several turns to ensure that all the kills go to Silk, Luca, and Clive. It was actually quite an involved process, since the enemies give very little XP at this point, and I was functioning under the self-imposed challenge of making do with only one encounter. It was worth the effort though, as in just one encounter I got the three of them to level 7. This means Luca and Clive are ready to promote, and also Silk finally learns Warp. A little late for Sophia Gate, but I'm excited to make use of this infinite range warp in every map going forward. Okay, with that out of the way, we return to Sophia Castle, picking up the Rider's Bane. With it, our new paladin, Clive, should have even greater performance in his upcoming battles. We also see an empty chest, which we are told held the Royal Sword before Dozer took it after seizing the castle. Finally, we head to the roof, where Mycen is waiting. Here, he tells Alm to follow his own path and to free all of Valentia from its cursed fate, with the help of a red-haired girl that will soon visit the castle. We'll be seeing this red-haired girl much sooner though, which I am of course very excited for. All in all, I had a fun time with Alm's group so far, but the next act of Gaiden holds some truly awesome experiences that I can't wait to show off. Mystery of the Emblem. Marth was unable to rescue Minerva, and he now sets his sights on Holm Beach. Here, our goal is to reunite with the mercenary Ogma, who's protecting the royal children Yumina and Yubello, then sees in the southeast. We start in the southwest, with a mountain that forces us to wrap around the north to reach the Seas Point, with lots of sandy terrain slowing down our progress. Luckily, we can actually control Ogma's group without talking to them, and they have an amazing first impression in the northeast. Yumina and Yubello are extremely frail, but Ogma is quite competent in protecting them, one-rounding all the nearby pirates. Without access to healing, all the nearby hunters would cause problems for him, but in looking nearby, we see the first instance of Sirius in the Marathon, a strong, masked paladin. Ogma recruits him turn 1, and we now have 2 powerhouses that can quickly clear out the enemies threatening the royal children. As for Marth's group, I start off by having Mathis protect the nearby village from the thief, then have Marth visit it turn 2. The other units all run north, with a particularly involved turn 1 that got 3 kills on player phase while keeping everyone else safe from the next group. After just a few turns, they were basically all done with the action of the map, with the exception of Linda, who stuck behind to fight the reinforcements, and Katria and Paula flew over the mountain, waiting for the opportunity to strike at the boss group with Ogma and Sirius. They didn't have to wait for long though, because after Marth visited the southern village, I had Yumina use her rescue staff, whose infinite range comes in clutch in this map, instantly teleporting Marth from one corner of the map to another, saving an insane amount of time from just walking through the beach to the second village. Sadly, this awkward placement of villages seems to be pretty commonplace in Mystery of the Emblem. They conceptually serve the same purpose as an FE1, giving us light push and pace and protecting them from thieves. In FE1 though, the villages seem to be already on the path to the seize point, so they're challenging the player to do what they would normally do, but slightly faster. Here, placing villages completely off the path only seems to slow the pace of the map. I appreciate that at least this chapter used its northeastern village to encourage players to engage with the new rescue staff, but as I demonstrated here, you don't even need another unit to defeat the thief threatening the village, as Yubelo can just two-shot them or wait on the village. Rescuing Marth sped up the map, but it didn't exactly solve any challenge. At least the villages seem to be rewarding so far, giving relevant weapons and unit recruitments. Here we get Caster, who once again shows up our archers with his higher stats and movements. He doesn't get much to do this map, except steal a kill from Yubelo with an unexpected one round, as Akma and Sirius only needed a few turns to clear out the initial enemies and push onwards to the boss group. After Sirius baited the hunters, Katria flew in from the mountains and helped get the kills on player phase. I sent Pella to start weakening the boss using her javelin, as he's quite powerful with the silver axe, and our group in the east is pretty low on HP. However, Pella continued to be absolutely insane, and got a crit for the Oko. I suppose that was XP that could have gone to Sirius, who I actually don't mind training, despite being a pre-promote, thanks to his seemingly solid XP gain and growths, along with his tie-in to the other games. Regardless, it's not like I could have gotten the kill to Yubelo or anything, because Marth was pretty much set to seize in just a couple more turns. I at least got Yubelo to get a kill in the end though, with the cavalry pushing through the west paying off, as Cecile is just barely able to reach a pirate, setting up the kill for Yubelo. I'm sure he'll have plenty of time to get a training arc in the future though, as the setup for this map seemed to be quite the exception when it comes to the pace of Mystery of the Emblem maps. Here's to hoping I'm wrong though, and that this redemption arc will continue for many chapters yet. Genealogy of the Holy War. Sigurd has conquered Verdane, but the nearby Augustria is not happy with the expansion of Granville's power. Eldigan attempts to put a stop to Augusti's invasion of Granville, but is captured for speaking out, leaving his sister Lachesis and her guards to fend off the Chalfie forces that are now moving in on Nordian. A lot going on, but thankfully, all of Augustria is willing to put their drama aside for a few hours while we prepare. As promised, the arena grind is taking even longer now, with more units in our army. This time though, there is an actual reward for making it through all 7 levels of the arena. After our champion, Azel, makes it to the final level, we are faced with the Myrmidon Holin, and after just a few resets, Azel comes out on top, and Azel's strength is enough to convince Holin to join our forces. He's pretty comparable to our other Myrmidon, Ira, having fairly strong combat paired with a strong proc skill, this time being the defense-ignoring Luna. Like the other infantry units though, the upcoming map will not be very kind to him, as there is a lot of ground to cover, incentives to move extremely fast, and even some backtracking, all of which limit potential contributions of our lower movement units. First up is rescuing the allied army of Nordian, with Lachesis' 3 paladins fending off Harhein's own much larger cavalry. Not only do we have the goal of defeating the Harhein cavalry in time to save Lachesis before recruiting her, but we are also rewarded after the battle for keeping her paladins alive. Saving Lachesis is a pretty solid side objective that challenges the player to utilize only the high movement units while taking out a fairly formidable enemy formation. Now, the reward for saving the paladins isn't conveyed, so it's difficult to call it an inherent objective, and even if you do know about it, much of the challenge is out of the player's control. As we see here, I moved the highest movement units full move every turn, and only got to Nordian the turn before one of the paladins reached under a half HP. I put together several kills using Sigurd, Quan, Lex, and even Ethlin with her new Lightbrand. Ooh, Lightbrand, that looks familiar. But yeah, had the paladin not dodged any attacks, or had more of the enemies targeted at him, he would have just died regardless of my actions. I got lucky though, so the paladin survived, and I was set to clean up the remaining cavalry on the following turn, with Finn getting the boss kill and Sigurd recruiting Lachesis. Unlike Holin, she's pretty weak at base, but she's got plenty of room to grow, and can use staves. Until we get her the rescue or warp staff though, her main job will be to use heal when possible, and stay out of enemy range. I'd love to go back to our main castle and do some trading there, but immediately after recruiting Lachesis, our cavalry has to rush over to the next group. Again, the time pressure here isn't conveyed well, but basically we need to seize Harheim by around turn 10 if we hope to stand a chance in saving the villages being burned in the center of the map. The enemy formation blocking our path to Harheim is actually pretty interesting, with a ballista and a bunch of knights. I really wanted to show off Azel one-rounding them, but unfortunately there just wasn't time for that, and so I had my cavalry initiate combat with them as soon as possible, killing the boss and some knights on player phase. Since Sigurd has places to be, he just rushed past them, letting my other units clean up the remaining kills. Lachesis' paladins even got in on the action, which is technically helpful, but they did get a few kills that could have gone to Ira or Azel if they had just been given the opportunity. I don't love the idea of cavalry does everything, infantry units do nothing, which is something that the side objectives in the beginning of this chapter enforce. However, I'll point out that this is generally the exception for Genealogy, and most of its side objectives are absolutely achievable without moving the cavalry full move every turn. The villages give diminishing rewards depending on your pace, which does mean you get more for going as fast as possible, but you aren't strictly punished if you don't, as in most cases, you only miss out on the item if you get there extremely late. If the goal of villages is just to give a slight push in pace, then I think this approach works very well, and I'm disappointed that this incremental approach wasn't brought back much in future titles. Another style of side objectives that Genealogy includes is in its recruitable characters, who often appear in the middle of strong enemy formations. We saw this with Yamka and his horde of fighters, Lachesis and the Harheim cavalry, and there are a couple more examples within this chapter alone. Like in FE1, if you want to recruit to the enemy, this sets up for a challenging turn in which the recruited character and the recruiter are stuck in the middle of strong enemies, and you need to put together a strong player phase to keep them alive. I love this as a challenge, with calculating one rounds or teaming up for kills to be a satisfying element of Fire Emblem systems, and it is a challenge generally separated from pace. While Harheim's cavalry and knight formation were pretty challenging to handle at a fast pace, the boss group was definitely not. Sigurd easily set up the knight in the way of the seize point for Finn to kill, with Quan, Ethlin, Alec, and Blax being around to ensure I could get the boss kill the following turn. However, Ethlin made things even easier by getting a crit with the Lightbrand on enemy phase, and I was able to set up the kill for her with an attack from Alec. With that, we're all set to seize Harheim just on schedule. The cavalry will continue to push forward to Anthony Castle, but I'm leaving Azel and the rest of our infantry behind, poised to fend off whatever enemies may come at us from the northeast. It's okay though, because after seizing Harheim, the cavalry gets some assistance in saving the central villages, coming from the Wind Mage Lewin and our dancer, Sylvia. We'll have to wait to see them in action until next part, but we're not quite done with green-haired Wind Mages just yet. Thracia, 776. With Leif captured and separated from his allies, all hope seems lost, but a figure who we'll come to know as the Wind Mage Ced has come to our rescue, sending his finest troops to break Leif and the other prisoners out. Well, finest troops may be a bit of a stretch, but the Axe Knight Brighton does pretty well against these early game soldiers, always critting on enemy phase with his personal wrath skill. The Myrmidon Matcha doesn't seem particularly outstanding, but if there's one thing we know, it's that she is a unit that can attack, and that's good enough for us in these upcoming string of chapters. Last in Ced's group, we have the thief Lara, who is crucial to our current mission. Leif starts in a cell with two other units, Fergus and Karen. Fergus is a sword knight whose combat is actually pretty solid at base. The Pegasus knight Karen, on the other hand, is pretty weak, and while the cavalry doesn't mind being forcibly dismounted in these indoor battles, missing out on flyer utility is pretty sad for Karen. Lithis is also locked up in a separate cell, supported by a few brigands that he convinces to join his side. All of our imprisoned units have been stripped of their inventories, and it's up to Lara to break them out and open the chests located in the other cells to regain their equipment. The victory condition is to escape in the north, but we also have the side objective of getting some green units to escape in the eastern or western hallways. And as always, every enemy in Thracia can be captured to gain access to their equipment, so we also have to consider whether we can get some captures in for the sake of getting more weapons and vulneraries for our now underdeveloped army. Starting off, the map actually goes very well, and I have a great time trying to piece together how to quickly break out all of my units from their cells and pick up the chests. This time, the time incentive is inherently a part of just beating the map, with reinforcement soldiers coming from the sides of the map most every turn. Brighton does a great job in killing the soldiers at the start and fending off the reinforcements from the east, while Lara breaks out Lithis, who then opens up Leaf's cell. While Matcha opens chests with the chest key, Fergus and Leaf fend off enemies coming from the south and west. The soldiers with javelins are tricky, as only the precious Lightbrand and Flame Sword can counterattack them, and getting several kills on player phase while also pushing forward and opening up a safe path for the civilians to escape is difficult, to say the least. I send Lithis back to help Brighton block off the reinforcements from the east, but a couple of reinforcements snuck through before he could make it, and one of the soldiers gets the opportunity to capture a civilian. But this in turn made them easy to defeat, and so the civilian was able to escape nonetheless. The civilians in the west had a much easier time, as Leaf and Matcha completely blocked off the reinforcements. Interacting with frail green units is not an uncommon side objective for Thracia, and while their exact usage depends on the map, I generally respect them. Since enemies only capture green units rather than killing them, there's more flexibility and room for reacting, and in general, the challenge of protecting or escorting uncontrollable allied units is an interesting way to push the player to come up with a strategy that goes beyond achieving the victory condition or keeping a fast pace. Sometimes the challenges can be frustrating, but I think that's usually due to other aspects of the maps and Thracia's design, and not the concept of saving green units itself. While saving the civilians in Chapter 4 was pretty engaging, I started to have not so great of a time afterwards. For one, the reinforcements just keep on pouring in, and the javelin soldiers become more and more frustrating as I try to find a balance between clearing out the enemies coming from the south and pushing all of my units to the final area in the north. The allied brigands actually did quite well in holding them off, but like me, they got greedy and tried to capture everything, limiting their further contributions. I eventually had to accept that some soldiers would be tailing me and constantly bothering me with their javelins, but I wasn't exactly happy with that. Regardless, I set it up for Lara to open the door, revealing quite the jump scare of a room, with a massive block of knights and mages waiting inside. I knew they were coming, but even then, it was extremely frustrating to deal with, especially considering that this room presents yet another side objective, that of recruiting the knight, Dulzen. I do the trick of leaving Lara unequipped so that Dulzen captures her, rather than attacking her, then have Leaf recruit him the following turn. Like the rest of our army, I'm extremely grateful for any unit that can do damage, and being bulky enough to live a couple hits is very nice, at least for now. I have him hold the 2-tile choke point with Leaf, which can be risky considering the amount of enemies with 2 range. Unlike other recruitments that occur in large enemy formations, we don't have the firepower to kill the enemies on player phase, and I have to reset a couple times so Leaf actually dodges one of the many 30 to 40 hit attacks. Eventually he pulls through, and I'm safely able to defeat the remaining enemies on the following turns, taking a couple more turns than necessary to steal from the clerics before killing them, just to be petty. Not my favorite iteration of a recruitment, but I think this is a good representation of how similar concepts for side objectives have been used throughout the years, with their exact context being very important for their effectivity. Our reward for escorting the civilians to their escape point is our second bonus chapter. Here, Ced comes back, this time joined with his apprentice, Asbel. While our army struggles in the south to fight another group of knights and mages, the two of them absolutely obliterate some soldiers in the northern corridor. Ced wields the mighty Forseti, which pairs massive might with a large boost to speed. Asbel is a little less flashy, but his unique weapon, Grafcalibur, is still quite strong and accurate. As you might guess, we don't get to recruit Ced just yet, but after the southern group pushes past their enemies, stealing all of the mage's fire tomes and escorting some more green units to an escape point, we at least get to recruit Asbel. Like many units locked behind a side objective, Asbel is quite the powerful reward, and honestly, I feel he speaks to how many of Thracia's side objectives can be too rewarding, in that you genuinely might struggle to even beat the later chapters if you don't accomplish them. Still, I know it's coming ahead of time, and while my thoughts on Asbel aren't quite as strong as others, I still am going to give him a training arc, even giving him one of the life rings at the end for plus 7 HP. Now, this training arc will have to wait for future chapters, because I'm cautious in moving forward due to the fog of war going on, and Ced gets a huge lead on my units. I try to get kills for myself, and I was going to at least try to capture the Sage with some cool equipment, but once I opened the door to the escape point in the north, Ced just ran forward and killed basically everything. I love Sed, so I'm not too upset by this, but it was rather tragic. I know I didn't need to capture the Sage, but they're one of Thracia's more obvious side objectives when it comes to the capture mechanic. Maximizing captures on generic enemies can be very demanding, and I appreciate that Thracia guides you to capture some specific enemies to get the truly unique rewards. Usually, this means not just defeating a difficult enemy formation protecting them, but also putting together a player phase that sets up a consistent capture. Here though, I wasn't even given the opportunity. While this pains me and my completionist mindset, capturing every enemy in Thracia is a line that I don't quite think I'm willing to cross. Still, I'm looking forward to the next parts where we break out of prison and regain access to an army that will make capturing even more reasonable. Yes, truly everything will be better for Leaf and his friends in the next part. Binding Blade. Roy was too late to save Hector in the last part's conflict, but we move on from this tragic loss, knowing that he'll come back in Blazing Blade. Our mission is to rescue his daughter, Lilina, and on our journey to Ostia, we must first cross the territory of Loss, guarded by the Lord Eric. As another point of concern, the noblewoman Chlorine has been captured, but the Myrmidon Rucker promises to sneak her out after a few turns. As referenced last part, this chapter features many strong cavaliers, also throwing some nomads in the mix. Combined with their high stats, their oppressive attack ranges, and our unideal hit rates, consistently teaming up for kills is a very difficult process, even when staying at the choke points at the bridges in the starting area. The map features 2 villages in the west though, with pirates spawning from the forts in the south that will eventually burn them down, encouraging us to not rely entirely on the choke points, and consider pushing forward when possible. I believe that pushing forward is typically considered to be tricky in this map, and while I did stay in the general starting area for the first few turns, I have to say I feel I got incredibly lucky with landing attacks, and so I was able to pull off a slightly aggressive approach on my first try. I finally learned my lesson from previous chapters, and had Marcus leading the main group, with one of the other cavaliers getting the nearby village instead. Turn 2, I was able to put together 3 kills, one for Roy and Wolt, as you might expect, with Marcus getting the third with the crits, though Deke and Shanna were still around if needed. From there, we have yet another trio of cavaliers and a nomad approaching. I again kept the choke point in the northern bridge while having Marcus fight some enemies in the south, and set up for a big player phase where I got a couple kills while keeping a defensive formation that prevented anyone else from dying to the remaining 2. By this point in time, Chlorine has successfully snuck out of the castle and is approaching Roy. Thankfully, none of the enemies on the map attack Chlorine, so she's safe from surviving cavaliers here. The map would be pretty ridiculous if this were not the case, but I have to say it takes away some of the tension of including recruitments as a side objective, rather than a feature of the map. Recruitments being a feature rather than a challenge is the general vibes I get from Binding Blade and future titles, but I know there are some exceptions down the line. Regardless, I pushed past the second wave of cavaliers and recruit Chlorine, or should I say, Chlorine recruits herself, as if to say we are not worthy of recruiting a noblewoman such as her. As a troubadour, she's got great utility going on, giving us a much needed second healer, as well as being able to take part in rescue drop plays. Her other main contribution is recruiting Rucker, who ambushes us on turn 6. I actually had sent Marcus down to get the village in the south, with some other units following to handle the nearby pirates. This in turn led Rucker to run south, separating him from the rest of the enemies that went east towards our main army. Dealing with those enemies without Marcus was still a little rough, but I was able to subdue the archers by trapping them, and Deke had amazing performance against the fighters and pirates. All in all, Binding Blade seems to be pretty standard when it comes to its incorporation of threatened villages and chests that give a push and pace. I have to say, the inconsistency of the more aggressive clears makes them feel a bit unfair at times, but with hard mode being somewhat challenging to even beat, it's nice having side objectives that genuinely challenge even experienced players to push past their comfort zone. I've also been told there are some rewarding stealable items down the line, which I'm looking forward to seeing. Like Do in Genealogy and our thieves in Thracia, stealing requires escorting a frail thief to strong enemies, then having a follow-up prepared to keep them safe. Stealing may not be as common past Thracia, but when it does appear, stealing stat boosters and promotion items seems to be a solid balance of challenge and reward. In the end, it worked out for me to kill mostly everything by the time Rucker had wrapped around south. Here, Chlorine finally gets the opportunity to recruit him. Rucker is known for being a very powerful combat unit, and while my experience with Rucker is limited to a normal mode run where he was quickly benched, I understand that he gets a great stat boost in hard mode since he starts as an enemy, and I may rely on him if needed. There's not much left for him to do here, but I do get him over to Eric, since even Marcus doesn't have a great matchup. With a crit from the Killing Edge, Rucker clutches out the kill, letting me seize before the Cavalier reinforcements from the east have a chance to catch up. With Eric taken care of, Roy is able to seize, concluding his journey at loss. Blazing Blade. We're back with Hector, and on his journey to uncover the ongoing conspiracy, Hector heeds the advice of Hellman and heads to Loss. This time, we encounter a younger Eric, who ambushes our group on orders of the hooded figure Ephidel. So, once again, we find ourselves fighting Eric on the plains of Loss, but there are a few changes this time. Firstly, Merlinus no longer is following us as a convoy on wheels, but rather sets up a tent, which we are encouraged to protect. Secondly, Blazing Blade continues to set itself apart from its predecessor by having a non-seize victory condition, this time being rout, and some enemies even start behind us in the far east. There are still the villages in the west though, with brigands and pirates coming from both the north and south to encourage a fast-paced approach, and our green unit of the map, the mage Urk, starts by the northern village, who this time actually needs to be protected from the enemies. Now, the pace needed to protect Urk and the villages is not too demanding, as the enemies here have decided to trade quality for quantity. Marcus can absolutely wreck everything in the center, breaking the challenge entirely, but since we don't strictly need to do this, I take the opportunity to have Lowen tank everything instead, with Marcus helping rescue drop Oswin to the front lines as well. Hector follows, eventually getting rescue dropped to the southern village, and the rest of the army sticks behind to handle the knight, soldiers, and Pegasus knights in the east. Sarah goes to meet Urk, recruiting him turn 2. Urk starts out pretty weak as a mage, and he gets one-rounded by some mercenaries, but he still has great performance against the soldiers and knights. Like Lou in Binding Blade, I don't have plans for him, but I'll use him while he's around. Urk, Sarah, and Rebecca struggle in the northern path, and honestly, the entire Elliewood group in the east struggled too, despite being so large, as I left only one vulnerary with them, and they quickly found themselves at low HP, resorting to turtling tactics to safely defeat the Pegasus Knights flying in from the south. At least Lowen, Oswin, and Hector absolutely crushed the center area. Lowen one-rounded the soldiers and teamed up with Oswin to kill the archers, getting all the kills by the time Marcus had dropped Hector to the choke point just south of Eric. Here, we visit the southern village, in which we recruit the troubadour Priscilla. Just like Chlorine, she brings some great utility to the group, and she will later recruit a very important sword user. With Priscilla recruited, Hector moves on to fight the boss group. He tanked them very well, and with the Wolf Bale, he had great damage output. It took some time to land enough hits to kill them all, but that was okay because the map came to a stall turn 5, when we are introduced to our first weather mechanic of Blazing Blade, Rain, drastically cutting everyone's movement. This is a feature that I've heard much frustration about, but honestly, I kind of loved it. It made me feel satisfied in getting everyone to quickly reach a point where their low movement wouldn't matter, like Hector sitting at a choke point and slowly killing the boss group. It goes away by turn 8, just in time for Lowen to save the northern group from their peril. While I have not played Hector hard mode before, I get the impression that the side objectives follow the same standard philosophy from Binding Blade, but are just overall easier to accomplish. I think they're a lot more rewarding though, considering how few resources Blazing Blade gives you to work with, which puts a greater emphasis on stealing. I don't actually think stealables are that common, but I appreciate how this limited resource context makes the players more encouraged to put together strategies that go beyond routing large groups of enemies, which I believe is otherwise fairly straightforward in many chapters. After Lowen finishes routing here, we see that Eric lives to tell another tale, of course, and he spills some of the tea on his castle's involvement in the disappearance of the Marquess Foray. However, Elliewood will have to wait until next time to hear more, just as Eric will have to wait until next time, or rather last time, to hear about his fate. Never change, Eric. Never change. Sacred Stones. Erica's bracelet has been stolen, and our forces are up in arms to retrieve it. Sounds like a bit of an overreaction, but Seth advises us that the bracelet is actually a very important artifact. Regardless, this plot device leads us to some real conflict, featuring another group of bandits that Erica is compelled to fight for the sake of her people. As if all this weren't enough motivation, the archer Naomi comes crying to us, asking us to save her friend, the bracelet thief, who is putting himself in danger in stealing from the brigands' stronghold. With that, we are finally set to fight some bandits. Naomi joins us, continuing the sad trend of an early game archer with relatively low base stats and growths. If opportunities arrive for Naomi kills, I'll take them, but the main focus for now is Ross, who I get a kill for most every turn here. Erica has to risk a rapier crit, but otherwise she's great in setting up kills against the brigands, with some rescue usage clearing the way for a turn 1 Ross kill in spite of the choke point at the breakable wall. After a turn, our bracelet thief, Colm, appears, and Naomi is waiting to recruit him right away in the north. As discussed earlier, thieves typically serve as a frail unit that you can choose to escort to chests, but because Sacred Stones has fairly weak enemies, his combat potential isn't all that bad. Still, his main purpose for now will be to get all the chests and stealable items that Chapter 3 included for the sole purpose of showing off how thieves work. I say this because none of these are great side objectives. The chests start right next to a starting position and aren't being threatened by enemy thieves, so the only challenge is potentially sending up another unit to help him fight the singular brigand up there, assuming he doesn't just dodge tank and kill them himself. The rewards from these chests are pretty basic, mostly being iron weapons that we can easily purchase outside of battle, and the rewards for stealing aren't very rewarding either, past maybe the pure water. Still, these are all very achievable goals, and I actually found it quite engaging to obtain them all while also fitting under my personal goal of minimizing turns. While he starts off by opening a chest in the north, the southern group needs to push past the enemies with stealables after just a couple turns, so I rescue drop Colm closer to steal those two, in which I need to set up a formation that keeps both him and Ross safe. After getting the stealables, Seth and Vanessa rescue drop him back to the chest in the north, then again take him south so that he can get the chest in the final room. I realized a bit too late that an enemy in there drops a chest key, which you could perhaps use to speed up the process even further. Oops. Regardless, I had plenty of opportunities to get Ross kills, taking him all the way to level 8, just a few kills away from his goal of level 10. Of course, not all Sacred Stone's chests and villages are like this, typically being the gentle push and pace that they aim for. There are also some pretty rewarding stealables in the future, which I love. I can't say most of the side objectives are particularly challenging, even if you aren't having Seth kill everything, but honestly, I'm okay with this, as it strengthens Sacred Stone's place as a game in which players can engage in fun, strategic Fire Emblem gameplay, without being asked to do anything too stressful, either in achieving the victory condition or side objectives. For the boss, Franz leads the charge. The boss two-shots him, but I played a bit aggressively, attacking on player phase and relying on dodging one of two 39-hit attacks. Not only did he dodge, but he actually crit on enemy phase, single-handedly getting the kill in just 2 rounds of combat, and saving the trouble of having to land an attack with Garcia the following turn. With that, Erica was set to seize, lining up perfectly with Colm opening the last chest. Path of Radiance. On their journey to escorting the Crimean princess Valencia to the Beast Lagoo's kingdom of Gallia, Ike's team sneaks through the forest to avoid conflict. They inevitably encounter Dayan forces though, and while Grail takes Gatry and Shannon to distract the main army, Ike leads the rest of our units through an alternative path. There's still soldiers to fight, but until we come out of the forest, the enemies won't attack us, and we can take our time putting together a turn where we jump the enemies. There's 2 paths to the escape point, but a pretty stringent turn for getting maximum bonus XP. As such, we finally have a reason to let Titania kill large groups of enemies, which I absolutely take, sending her to the western path after our army takes a turn to inch forward. Meanwhile, I have a good time putting together kills in the east with Ike, Boyd, Oscar, and Soren. Ike one-rounding archers was particularly useful, helping set up a turn 2 where I killed enough enemies in the immediate area to stay safe on enemy phase, while still pushing forward. Boyd didn't quite double everything, and his hit rates were awkwardly low thanks to biorhythm shenanigans, but he absolutely pulled his weight. Soren got kills when possible, even getting a 1-round turn 2 after proccing Adapt, 3-shotting the soldier. I know I didn't go quite as fast as possible, with Riss especially being super far behind just to be extra safe, and I definitely took a few turns at impromptu choke points to give time for Ike to get healed up. It's alright though, because Titania had to take several turns herself, dealing with all the 2-range enemies, one at a time. When everyone finally converged in the south, I again opted for safety over speed, but the boss group did not move, making me feel a little foolish. The boss kill went to Titania to save a turn. Normally, I'd find this unsatisfying, but it let me escape by turn 10, which means more bonus experience, which essentially means I fed the boss kill to Ileana. Ike has made it to Gallia, but he sends Alencia, Rolf, and Mist to the castle alone, taking our other units back to find Grail's group. We investigate a nearby fort, only to find more Daean soldiers inside. Now, this map actually features a few apparent side objectives, with a couple chests in the middle that an enemy thief will eventually steal. Because my Ike is so strong, I send him north alone, with everyone else pushing forward in the west and getting some nice tag team kills. After a turn, the Myrmidon Mia shows up in the north. She prioritizes speed over strength, which is conceptually fine, but I've heard that in practice, she doesn't quite do so well. I won't be using her just because I don't particularly care for her, but she does get some nice action in this map, making a choke point with Ike, keeping Riss safe inside the chest room, while my sword units defeat the pathetically weak fighters and soldiers. Recruitments in Path of Radiance generally don't appear to be particularly challenging, but this mostly seems to be because the enemies they join around aren't incredibly strong, and I appreciate that the game at least makes you think a bit more than usual for some units. Meanwhile, the western group takes a couple turns at the 2-tile choke points there to set up kills for Boyd and Soren. Titania then breaks through, Okoing the thief before they even get so much as a chance to go after the chests, baiting the nearby knights and setting up a kill for Soren the following turn. So yeah, there goes another side objective with not that much strategy involved. Running one unit forward to kill everything generally seems to solve not just the victory conditions for Path of Radiance, but also many classic side objectives like villages and chests, and this experience never has to go away if you use bonus XP to power level 1 units. Now, there are a few chapters with unique side objectives built into the bonus XP system, involving genuinely engaging challenges like not killing certain units or stealth. I really like their incorporation, with the bonus XP allowing for a meaningful reward for putting together strategies that are inherently unrewarding. Still, I don't believe these are all too common, so for the most part, Path of Radiance seems to generally give a gentle push and pace in a game that's already not too difficult to play at a fast pace. This is a bit disappointing, considering the interesting potential of bonus XP, but at least we get one more title that keeps the system. Turn 4, we see that Grail is safe, but he goes off to spar with the enemy general Petrine. Gatri and Shannon rejoin our army in the north, a wave of reinforcements spawn in the west and south, and a boss group is now present in the north. I send Gatri to handle the enemies in the west, doubling thanks to his speed level and easily taking them out in just a couple rounds. Shannon rejoins with the group in the south, but he was not quite able to make it when he was needed most. Boyd had been left behind in the center, and I just had him beat a knight in the north, but thankfully I was able to get the kill with a hand axe, with Oscar providing a huge 1 damage chip attack with the short spear, letting Boyd stay out of range of the reinforcements. From there, Ike, Boyd, Titania, Soren, and Shannon all met up in the center, easily taking out the southern reinforcements before moving on to the boss group. I again did not know whether they would move, which ultimately cost me a turn as I played a bit too safe in my approach. The boss is actually fairly strong with an Elfire, and you wouldn't struggle if you just send Titania forward to kill them, but I was of course stubborn in moving Ike and Boyd forward to get the kill, actively choosing to use the weaker Iron Axe in hopes of setting up the boss kill for Boyd. In doing so, I didn't have enough attacks available to fully rout, and so the final turn was spent killing a boss left at 1 HP. In any other game, I'd say this is only unsatisfying in my personal goals, but I'll say that Path of Radiance actively incentivizes the player to be micromanaging their turn counts, in knowing that they'll be rewarded for engaging in the game at a fast pace, measured by turns, but not actually knowing what pace they're being challenged to play at. My clear is still under the required 10 turns, but I can't help but be a little miffed by this moment. Next, we check up on Grail's spar. We get caught in an ambush, with the ominous Black Knight making an appearance. But some Lagoos come to our aid, including Ranulf. Yay! He doesn't join our army now, but he does get us safely set up at our new base. Grail speaks with Ike in the forest for a moment, before venturing off on his own. Ike chases after him, only to find him blocked in a battle with the Black Knight. Grail is rather confident about the outcome, but... the Black Knight warps away, and Ike will have to wait another day to get his vengeance. Radiant Dawn. Things are looking up for Micaiah, who Peleus has designated as a general in the Liberation Army. Against the ill advice of our evil-looking strategist, Izuka, Micaiah leads the army to their first objective, Terran. Here, we see the cruelty in the current leadership, with the general, Fiona, sharing sympathy for her people. Before we get to Fiona, though, we set up base outside the town, where we get the opportunity to look at our new recruits. The general, Torneo, is ridiculously strong compared to both our units and the enemies, and he can basically just walk forward and kill everything. The Swordmaster, Zihark, and Draco Knight, Jill, are pretty strong themselves, but there are some enemies they don't kill, and they will die if sent to fight too many enemies at once. As you might expect, I'm not too fond of units that just kill everything without thinking, but at least Torneo gives us a good introduction to Radiant Dawn's skill system, and that we can take away personal skills and teach them to a unit with enough skill capacity. Resolve is great, giving a skill and speed boost when below half HP, and I give it to Micaiah for now, who can double enemies once it's activated. From talking to Kurth, we also get the skill Renewal, which I give to Volug. Lastly, I use most of our remaining money to forge an Iron Axe for Jill, which she'll be able to use to accurately one-round many enemies. The upcoming battle is split into two parts, and the objective in the first section is to rout, winding through a mountainous area with plenty of thickets stalling our progress. Still, I get Ileana up front to wander around the fighter, with Volug and Jill running forward to protect her. This proved to not be necessary though, as the theme of this chapter was having enemies attack to avoid getting counterattacked, rather than actually doing damage. This was a little awkward, as I consistently left Ileana in range of enemies as I pushed her west, but the enemies would always go after Volug, who was leading the charge. This also occurred in the east, in which I had Edward leading at first, then switched to having Soth and Torneo up front at the choke point. I left Micaiah in the back, ready to activate Resolve and sweep some knights and archers, but she never got the opportunity. The most thrilling part of the map was definitely dealing with the Pegasus Knight reinforcements. They swooped down at you from the mountains, and I enjoyed reacting to them and flying Jill over to handle them. Again, sometimes they went after Volug instead, but Jill still got a couple kills in the process. She wasn't close enough to handle the ones in the east, and if you'll remember, I had left the frail Micaiah over there, with the choke point not mattering to the Pegasus Knights. Between the avoid from the Soth support and Resolve, though, she dodge-tanked them all, which was pretty epic. I didn't quite get Volug and Ileana to the northwest fast enough to win before the final wave of reinforcements showed up, but I still won fast enough for maximum bonus XP. In Radiant Dawn, meeting maximum bonus experience turn counts seems to be actually pretty engaging, because the maps are designed to still be challenging even with powerhouses like Volug around. Again, the exact challenge is not made clear, which makes me more anxious when playing than I'd like to be, but like Path of Radiance, it's definitely an interesting way to get players to be constantly thinking past just the victory condition. Now, Radiant Dawn adds the persistent side objective of Hidden Treasure, if I even dare call this a side objective. The idea of sending units to certain sections of the map and piecing together where hidden items might be hiding is actually very unique, and I do think this could be an entertaining process, but Radiant Dawn seems to prefer to just haphazardly scatter one coin and one actually pretty relevant item across the map. Getting units to reach these spots under the restrictions of the max bonus XP turn count can be engaging, but as I demonstrate here, it typically ends up just being something that you have to look up. I actually forgot about it until the final turn, and I had to go back to a battle save and stall my victory to get the arm scroll, since there's also luck involved in whether you even get the item. Great! With the first stage routed, we immediately move on to the second stage. Here we see Fiona, whose stats are looking a bit rough. Our main objective is to defeat the boss, who is on top of a hill in the northwest, guarded by a ballista and an assortment of other enemies. Another ballista is located right in front of our starting positions, but I immediately take out the archer with Volug, with my other units teaming up for the other kills in the immediate area. Nolan shoves Iran forward, letting him and Torneo take the choke point at the bridge in the west. We now see Fiona's sympathy for her people coming back into play, as she betrays the enemy and has her own cavalry protect the citizens. This is an exciting moment, but it also breaks our string of overpowered recruits, and sadly for her, I don't care about Fiona enough to train her. What I do care about, though, is protecting her allies. In doing so, we are rewarded with bonus experience, which is thankfully incremental, getting more XP for more units saved, rather than getting nothing if one dies. Like Genealogy's villages, I really like this approach, and it's definitely a strength of the bonus XP system in being able to give incremental rewards for all sorts of challenges, beyond just tracking turn counts. Knowing this challenge was coming, I rushed Volug and Jill to protect them, but even then it was a bit of a struggle, as both took a lot of damage from the fire mages and needed to hold back a bit to stay safe. The west went a lot better though, with Iran tanking the cavaliers quite well, and Micaiah waiting in the back, getting Okos with the Tawny. I could have delayed the victory for a couple turns, but I ultimately decided to just storm the boss group, getting them to approach turn 4, and setting up a ton of kills on the final turn 5. Soth got the hidden treasure when waiting in range of the boss group, and had I delayed the victory for a turn, I also could have stolen the javelin from the soldier up on the hill. Stealing in Radiant Dawn is not a very common side objective, unlike Thracia and the GBA era, and I don't believe it's typically very rewarding, but it's technically something extra the player can engage with. Maybe in a route map it would be more satisfying to pull off, but here I opt to just defeat the boss, with Micaiah still Okoing with the Tawny. You go, girl. With the boss defeated, we get the Paragon skill, which will be a great tool in getting more experience on our unit of choosing. As if eager to get in on this Paragon action, Fiona talks to us after the battle and joins our army. I'm not sure who I'm giving Paragon to quite yet, but I'm sorry to say that it is not going to be you, Fiona, and I'm going to have to leave you on the cliffhanger as to when you'll get some solid contributions. Shadow Dragon. We're back with Marth and the Altean army, but before we can meet up with our allies in Aurelis, we have to cross the Lee, guarded by the Macedonian cavalry. We now unlock the prep screen, and there is a lot we can do here. Like New Mystery, the most notable feature is free reclassing, in which each unit gets access to one of 2 class pools, depending on their base class. In the last part, I said I would only be engaging with the reclassing system if it made for a more entertaining experience, and I'm absolutely looking to spice up hard-won Shadow Dragon. So I start off our reclassing with a bang, turning the Cleric Lena into a Pegasus Knight. She's honestly pretty comparable to Shida. Her speed may be lower, but it's enough to double many enemies on hard won so far, and no Wing Spear doesn't matter when you forge a plus 10 might Iron Lance for her. But yeah, Shadow Dragon just lets you do that, once per chapter, and as I've referenced in FE1, you get a lot of gold to facilitate these insane forges. Since Pegasus Knight Lena loses us a healer, I also reclassed Navarre to Curate. I didn't have an interest in him as a combat unit, but now we'll get to start training a second unit, who I actually like, in staff rank, in case that matters down the line. Just like FE1, my unit distribution was sending Kain to the northeast to defeat the fighters and Hunter, while everyone else charged west to meet the Cavaliers. Thanks to the hard mode bonuses, Kain was just 1 speed short of one-rounding the fighters this time, though thankfully he's still 2-shot. Still, he took a lot more damage in the process, and I basically had to run him backwards to avoid taking too many hits at once, using a vulnerary to stay safe. Again, Abel led in the west, though this time the enemy bowmen didn't move unprovoked, while all 5 Cavaliers charged us at once. This was interesting, as it makes the Mathis recruitment a bit more challenging, even if you hold back and don't aggro the archers and knights guarding the bridge. Lena was a bit too far back to talk to Mathis as soon as he approached, but she still played her role in thinning out the enemies, one-rounding a Cavalier. Shida busted out the Wing Spear for the first time to Oko another, and Ogma finished the one that Abel counterattacked. With this, I was safe on enemy phase, and Lena was free to recruit Mathis the following turn. Shadow Dragon Mathis is even more amusing, as now, the generic enemy cavaliers are just straight up even stronger. I don't personally mind this, but I absolutely do mind the painful clear of Chapter 3 that he caused in Mystery of the Emblem. So yes, we are doing Combat Lena and benching Mathis completely out of spite here. On the other hand, I do intend to use the other new unit, Merrick. This time, he joins at the southern village, which was pretty easy to secure, with the enemy thief starting right by our army. I love this change in recruitment timing, as he now actually joins before fighting the knight guarding the bridge. Unfortunately, I didn't know this ahead of time, and sent Jigen to block the bowman at the bridge before recruiting Merrick, meaning he didn't get much action in. Still, it worked out to chip the knight over a few physical attacks, while the bowman opted to attack some units across the river, Barst somehow getting a 1-round with the hand axe. For the final stretch, Lena flew over and got the last few kills. I was prepared to have her chase after the thief going after the northern village, but apparently the thief AI was changed, giving the player more time to chase after them. This felt a bit strange at first. If you remember, I actually enjoyed the challenge that saving the northern village added to FE1, and it now feels like Shadow Dragon thieves are just a very small nudge in pace. However, I can imagine the higher difficulties would make getting side objectives almost too difficult. I'd speculate this makes the difficulty of Shadow Dragon just beating the game, rather than engaging with interesting side objectives, kind of like Gaiden, but we'll just have to see how the rest of the game plays out to see if this is true or not. The end of the map went according to plan, but I won't say that it went well for everyone. I'm just going to be completely honest, there are a few characters in which I'd have a better experience with the game if they just weren't in our list of units, and unfortunately for him, Riss is one of them, so I get him killed. Sorry. But yeah, let's just move on to the actual ending of the map. I have Merrick once again weaken the boss with Excalibur. Before seizing, I sent Shida to the arena, not trusting Abel. She actually beat a fighter without needing to get too lucky, but I didn't want to press this any further, and just went for the boss kill as soon as Marth was around to seize. Of course, getting the kill with Lena. After seizing, we are given the Silver Sword, and are told to deliver it to Hardin. We don't quite know who he is yet, but I'm looking forward to meeting him and his cute cast of cavaliers. Not that they'll match up to the might of Pegasus Knight Lena, of course. New Mystery of the Emblem. On Emperor Hardin's orders, Marth continues chasing after the Macedon princess Minerva, where even more Draco Knights await us. For the base, there's one feature I'd like to highlight real quick. How's everyone? This seems to be like the Barracks and Awakening, where we can get support points, XP, and unique weapons as real-life time passes. I'll only be interacting with this once, right before I play the maps, since I want a more consistent first experience. As for the Forge this chapter, I make an Iron Lance +5 for Catria, since I know that her performance will be very important, at least in the next couple chapters. Looking at the map, it seems everything is generally still the same, with the ominous Draco Knights hovering over the mountain, a village to get in both the southwest and northeast corner, and Mathis being in the boss group. The differences seem to be a limited deployment size, weaker Draco Knights, and an additional village. Given who we got from the last added village, I wonder what could be there. But yeah, like last time, I want to push through the drawbridge, but I do the smart play and just bait the Draco Knights to the south first, knowing that Marth will need several turns to catch up anyways. Luke is able to tank them well and do decent damage on the counterattack, setting up kills for Ryan, Roderick, and our new mage, Linda. She's got some cool, unique tomes, so even though she's a bit weaker than Queen, I say more mages means more fun, even if the Steelbow +2 makes her contributions not as necessary as in Mystery of the Emblem. After dealing with the Draco Knights, I fly Catria up to assist Palla, remembering the Cavalier reinforcements to be quite overwhelming. Apparently, New Mystery limited the reinforcements to only show up for a handful of turns, and Palla and Catria blocked some of them off, but Catria did get a 1-round with her Iron Lance +5, so it was all worth it. In the south, Marth actually gets the drawbridge key from the first village, and it's at the second village where we get exactly what I was waiting for. Not a silver axe, but the powerful Bord, who even brings a hammer to help fight the boss. I think I'll stick with Linda, but thanks Bord. I have a special place for you right next to Cord. Once Marth delivers the drawbridge key to Roderick, we're set to approach the boss group. Luke was again in the lead, and he could have done extremely well with the steel sword, But fun fact, New Mystery gave Mathis an Iron Lance, and enemies seemed to opt for damage over self-preservation, which led to Mathis getting one-rounded by Luke on enemy phase. Cool. With Paula having used the northern save point, I was set to try again with the Iron Lance, and successfully didn't kill Mathis, but this doesn't exactly make me like Mathis more. On the following turn, I finished the Cavaliers, which was much more difficult than you'd expect, since the mages couldn't be involved, lest they died to the Ballista plus Javelin Mathis. Still, I clutched out the kills, and was able to trap Mathis, eventually setting it up for Ryan and Roderick to hold him back while everyone else ran northeast, in anticipation of a turn where the Draco Knights swooped down from the mountain. On the way, Queen, Linda, and Luke teamed up to fight the boss, with the kill going to Queen. After a lot of walking, Marth finally recruits Julian at the northeastern village. I don't expect to make Julian a relevant combat unit in any of his appearances, but I'll still bring him around for any chests that may appear. We haven't seen any yet, but I anticipate they will serve their typical purpose of being threatened by enemy thieves for the sake of encouraging a slightly faster pace. I'm kind of looking forward to this, because so far, the villages don't seem to give interesting challenges. Having Julian walk down to Mathis was fairly simple, and while the formation to trap him did involve thinking about the game differently, it ended up feeling more tedious than strategic. I think the most interesting contribution that New Mystery provides for side objectives is including rewards locked behind a challenging enemy formation. I still don't appreciate the lack of conveyance of the challenge here, with visiting the armory just randomly triggering their movement, but I at least knew it ahead of time in New Mystery. I remember reading their AI in the wiki for Mystery of the Emblem, and it specifically says that the Mountain Draco Knights won't move until you visit the shop. As such, I felt very clever in having everyone else run away, then flying Paula up to kill them one by one with a Silver Lance. Apparently, New Mystery specifically changed the AI so you couldn't do this, according to what I read in the wiki afterwards, so I got jump scared when suddenly Paula got attacked by every remaining Draco Knights. The real jump scare was for the Draco Knights though, as Paula one-rounded them all, getting a lucky dodge at the last second to stay alive. A very inconsistent end to the battle, but I felt it was incredibly hype, so I just took the win and moved on. Before moving on to the beach next part, we get to do our first New Mystery added Gaiden map. Unlike other games, I don't believe New Mystery's Gaiden maps are locked behind sided objectives, so that all players would be guaranteed to experience the remake's new content. Here, we get another glimpse at Katarina, who makes some headway on her redemption arc in her conversation with the boss, Clarice, before leaving us to fight a few knights and archers in another winding mountainous map. I'm glad to see the tiny New Mystery original map design return though, making it much more manageable. We've got the additional challenge of protecting the curate's wrists. He was useful in the difficult prologue maps, but at this point we have as much healing as we could want thanks to militia and reclassing. I crushed the map with Marth, Luke, and Queen one-rounding knights, and Katria flying around the mountains with her Iron Lance +5, but you shouldn't be surprised to hear that it doesn't bother me in the slightest when I don't meet up with Riss and let them get killed. I do think this is an actually engaging side objective, but I just did not care to engage with it because I knew I did not want the reward. If you just brought, say, Paula over Linda or Militia, or maybe used the Master Seal we got last chapter for an early promotion, it could be pretty easy. I think I could have done it if I had just left a unit in range of a knight at one point, but I was unfamiliar with the reinforcements and didn't want to risk anything. Linda only got one kill at the beginning, since I pushed Marth forward really quickly, with Luke leading him to the northern path, and Clarice just straight up leaving the map after turn 2, setting up for a nice and quick turn 6 clear. Wow, I'm really glad I'm not playing on Lunatic. Awakening. Crom heads to the Elis Pelagia border. Here we find Aversa and King Gangrel, who ask for the Fire Emblem in exchange for the noblewoman Maribel. The mage, Rickon, rescues Maribel with his trademark wind magic, but the two are still separated from our forces on the border pass and its many cliffs. We've got plenty of choke points leading up the cliffs, but wyverns are scattered across the north and will fly around us. I actually played this chapter on Lonku's birthday, giving him a defense resistance surge. Between this, some strong pair-ups, and tonics, we're set to not just rescue Rickon and Maribel, but absolutely crush the enemies in our mission to rout. Our main pairs now are Stall and Kellum and Lonku and Vake. Stall isn't doubling, but is incredibly tanky and strong. Turn 1, Lonku takes the lead, eager to start his training arc and sweep everything. Rickon and Maribel had to pair up and wait on the singular tile outside of enemy range, since Stall missed his javelin attack and Lonku couldn't kill the Myrmidon on player phase. In the south, I killed the barbarians with Crom and Queen, leaving just one Dark Mage. All this set up for an amazing turn 1 enemy phase, where Lonku one-rounded the northern barbarian and finished the Myrmidon with just the Iron Sword, while the Dark Mage attacked into Stall, who dealt massive damage with the javelin. For turn 2, Rickon finished the Dark Mage in the north, Queen finished the Dark Mage in the south, Lonku one-rounded the next barbarian, and Stall just straight up OHKO'd the next mage, with Stall being in range of the incoming wyverns. They're quite the challenge to defeat, being pretty bulky and not the easiest to double. We've got some great answers to them on our team though, with Queen doubling with the Crom pair-up, one-rounding with a basic wind spell, or even OHKOing with Rickon's Elwind and a mage pair-up thanks to our magic boon. Between this and my lead units having incredible bulk, I'm pretty aggressive in my approach, having Stall run north while Lonku runs west. This led to a turn 5 where I had to deal with the boss, a generic wyvern, a barbarian, and a Myrmidon, while some reinforcements from the southern fort were starting to approach. I put together all the kills in the boss group on player phase, with Queen one-rounding the boss, Virion shooting down the generic wyvern, and Miriel finishing the Myrmidon. Lonku pulled out his killing edge, one-rounding the barbarian on player phase, and the incoming wyverns on enemy phase. Now, while I had an incredible experience putting together all these kills, which contributed to the victory condition of routing, I have to say I generally don't enjoy Awakening's side objectives. There are a lot of enemies with droppable items, but most of the maps are route, so you're guaranteed to get the items anyways, and they don't really count. There are occasionally some chests and villages, but I get the impression that they're not very tense to save, or there's just no time pressure to get them at all. The most engaging side objectives, in my opinion, come from some maps in the early and mid-game where you have to save recruitable units. Maribel and Rickon start recruited, but I still count them, and putting together a strategy that pushes through a choke point is a cool experience. I mean, if you do Paralog 1 first, you can use the rescue staff on them, but that's at least a somewhat interesting puzzle to present to new players. Speaking of Paralogs, I do actually think that there are engaging side objectives in Awakening, but they are all put in optional Paralogs, in which the player is only guaranteed to have a few available, which appear in the early game. I feel this kind of compounds Awakening's issue in not having a very engaging late game. Not only are side objectives not very rewarding by then, but I don't actually think the player is presented with many at all. I'm looking forward to doing the Paralogs though, which we'll start doing in the next part or so. I finish up the map strong, with Stall soloing the enemies in the north, while Lonku takes a choke point south of the same enemies. This ends up splitting them up in such a way that denies me from getting the kills on the enemy phase, and as such, I have to take an extra turn to finish just one Myrmidon. A little awkward, but I overall found this to be a very enjoyable experience, with Lonku getting the present of a quick but very productive training arc in the process. Fates. Birthright. Queen has safely returned to Hoshido, and before moving on to our next mission at Fort Jinya, I'd like to highlight my activity in the Mai Castle. I frequently checked in between recordings, which had some pretty big impacts. For one, I got to feed our dragon maid Lilith, who in return gives you gold bars that sell for 300 gold, through which I got a total of 8. Another important feature is the private quarters, which lets us get up close and personal with our teammates, increasing our support points. Through this, I unlocked many support levels with Queen, already reaching A rank with Rinka, and very importantly, Kaze. We now head to Fort Jinya, where Sakura is tending to the wounded, aided by her retainers Tsubaki and Hana. Norian forces have surrounded the fort, led by the Cavalier Silas, who seems to recognize us. Regardless, it's up to us to fend them off, with Sakura's retainers joining the team. Tsubaki is our early game flyer, but is designed a bit differently from the Pegasus Knights of the past, actually having decent strength and defense at the cost of average speed. The Samurai Hana is a more traditional Myrmidon-like unit, with high speed but low offense and defense. I'm not a huge fan of Hana, but Tsubaki's pretty cute, and has a lot of room to grow, making him perfect for the team. Starting off, Kaze gets a chest in the east, while everyone else uses pair-up tactics to reach the first knight turn 1. This chest is a pretty non-side objective, in that it doesn't add challenge in getting it, past making you spend extra time. As the first chest in Fates, I'll accept it this one time as a boring tutorial. The chest in the center is actually pretty cool though, with an enemy outlaw showing up after a few turns to steal it, which means we'll have to push through these choke points in the fort to reach them. The time pressure isn't that strong though, so I'm safe to set up Tsubaki at the choke points, paired up with Queen, getting plenty of kills, fittingly using the Tsubaki's pike to get some 1 rounds against the outlaws. Interestingly enough, each choke point here is initially blocked off by 2 enemies paired up that won't move, but there are enemies coming from behind, so to avoid a situation where we're all cramped at the choke point, there's some pressure in quickly defeating these paired up enemies. I'm able to get to the second choke point just in time, and after defeating the paired up enemies, I push Rinka out front. She's pretty bulky, and I was expecting her to just tank 1 knight and be done. Apparently though, my Rinka is insane, 1-rounding knights thanks to her personal skills +4 damage boost and just barely reaching the doubling thresholds with a speed surge. Much like Pala in New Mystery, she absolutely should have died in the process of her sweep, but Rinka got incredibly lucky, dodging several of the knights. I could have consistently done the sweep had Hana just paired up with her though. It wasn't my intention, but it was so epic that I just took the lucky sweep and moved on. The chest thieving outlaw now shows up, but we're already set to cut them off long before they actually wrap around to reach the chest. There's honestly plenty of time to react to them, and so long as you just vaguely try to hold forward, you've got time to defeat them before they run away. Looking ahead, I noticed that Birthright actually has a lot of these moments, but they get notably less interesting once you have a strong unit that can just walk forward and kill everything, with Birthright just straight up providing one, fairly early on, in Ryoma. There are also a lot of enemies with droppable items, but like Awakening, a lot of the maps are routes anyways. Also like Awakening, I don't feel that rewards are all that rewarding past the early game once you can start sweeping, which is especially true with infinite durability. To point out one final similarity, a lot of the interesting side objectives for Fates are also incorporated in paralogs, most of which are tied to getting S supports between your units. As such, there are definitely interesting challenges in Birthright if you look for them, but if you're just looking to beat the game, the process can be pretty underwhelming, and from what I've observed, the game doesn't push its optional challenges very hard. In the end, I successfully saved the center chest with Kaze and Jacob. They were very early, but it was pretty much just in time under my own restrictions of minimal turn counts, lining up with Tsubaki and Rinka fighting Silas and his cavaliers. Silas's group is very cautious to move, so I have to take some extra time to walk up to him instead. In a couple turns, I was able to get the kills, with Tsubaki concluding his great training arc by defeating Silas. After the battle, Silas reveals himself as our childhood friend, and we get him to join our forces. Yay! We also get some more Hoshiden units, including the ninja Saizo and diviner Orochi. More on the 3 of them next part, but I'll highlight Orochi's personal skill now, which lets her capture generic enemies, who we can later recruit to join our army. Like Thracia, this kind of turns every enemy into a side objective, but it's not as stressful as Thracia capture in my opinion. There's no benefit to capturing every single enemy, and while no capture is strictly necessary to beat the game, getting new units is always an impactful reward, and you can look forward to seeing a generic enemy or 2 being on the endgame team for sure. Conquest. This time, Queen returns to Nor. In the My Castle, we again get lots of gold from Lilith, and unlock an A support with our one other unit, Jacob, who also got an amazing strength surge and some special daggers that will boost his performance in the upcoming chapter. Now back in Nor, Garen sends us on the mission to eliminate the Ice Tribe, as some deity named Anankos has apparently deemed. We have to do it alone, but upon encountering some Faceless on their way in the Lost Lorn Forest, Jacob comes to the rescue. We'll eventually get more support coming our way, but for the start of the map, it's just up to us and Jacob to rout all the Faceless. The map is split up with a fairly open space at the beginning, with Faceless swarming us from 1-tile choke points in the north and south, in addition to a 2-tile bridge in the west. We've got time to secure the northern and southern choke points, so I send Queen and Jacob west first. Queen's Dragonstone is spectacular here, letting her actually survive several rounds of combat from all these faceless. Even with the magic boon, she's a bit shy of one-shotting, and she has to be wary of the faceless, with skills that deal a fixed percent of damage after combat, but otherwise, she does great in baiting faceless and setting up kills for herself or other units the following turn. Here, I give the initial kills to Jacob. Turn 4, our first reinforcements arrive. Our sister Elise joins, with her healing and personal skill that gives -3 damage taken, +1 dealt, to adjacent allies, being very appreciated here. Even more exciting to me though, is Silas. He's not immediately powerful in any given area, but we can easily push his strength and defense to see performance like Stahl did in Awakening. For now, his biggest focus will be building up lance rank so he can use the javelin, and we might as well give him as many kills as possible in the process. Jacob got some offhanded crits on more than one occasion, but otherwise he was a big help in setting up Silas kills, while also using Silas dual strikes to further build weapon rank. Turn 4, we get our other wave of reinforcements, Elise's retainers, Effie and Arthur. I have no long-term plans for either, but Effie will do great in tanking these early game enemies as a knight, and Arthur will further push her strength with his great fighter pair-up stats. For this map, I have them go north, and with occasional healing from Elise, Effie solos the enemies coming from the north, two-shotting the faceless one by one. Unfortunately, this map doesn't feature any side objectives for us to look at, but we can kind of look back at Chapter 6 to get an idea of Conquest's approach. There are definitely some chests and villages that push your pace, but from my observations, there are also a lot of rewards locked behind difficult enemy formations, kind of like how the Master Seal and Silverlance were locked behind the Mountain Draco Knights in Mystery of the Emblems Chapter 3. Specifically, I roughly counted 70% of chapter maps to have this challenging enemy formation approach, and only 30% to have side objectives encouraging you to just play at a faster pace. I think this is a really interesting approach, and it synergizes well, with Conquest being a game that provides challenge in handling thoughtful enemy placements with unique skill combinations, even in achieving its victory conditions. The rewards are all pretty impactful too, with gold being so limited, so engaging with these challenges is not just uniquely interesting, but actually encouraged. Chapter 7 is one of the few maps that doesn't have any such optional challenge. I don't really mind it though, as it lets the player focus on adjusting to the difficulty of defeating enemies with unique skill combinations, and getting by without an overwhelming amount of resources. Poison Strike and Grizzly Wound did indeed prevent me from just letting Queen or Silas fight enemies in huge groups, and I had to put together a lot of player phase kills utilizing dual strikes, or putting together defensive formations at choke points, which was fun. I ultimately had Queen, Silas, and Jacob running back and forth between the west and south as the enemies approached in their groups, with Silas tanking the boss at the southern choke point in the end. He just barely lived, but he set himself up for a kill using Queen's dual strike on the final player phase, with Queen killing the final faceless with a Dragonstone and a dual strike from Silas. He's not quite at D-Lances yet, but he's making great progress. I'm very happy to have him on the team, and we'll get even more exciting recruits in the next chapter. Revelation. Neither Hoshido nor Nor have sided with us, but at least we have Azura and Jacob. Thanks to the private quarters, I got a support with both of them, in which Azura takes us to some mystery location called Vala, where she spoils some lore. Quite the silly consequence of using the private quarters for a month before playing the next chapter, but in the very next scene, we are basically given the full introduction. Azura guides us back to the bottomless canyon, and convinces us to voluntarily jump through, leading us to the mystery kingdom of Vala. We're conveniently not allowed to talk about the kingdom unless we're actually in Vala, so Azura takes this moment to establish Anankos as the driving force between the Hoshidan-Norian conflict. Before we can leave, some illusory soldiers surround us, and we'll have to fight our way out. We've only got 3 units, but as referenced last part, the chapter is not so accommodating for this. Our goal is to defeat the boss, then seize, taking place at the end of a long maze of caves. The map also takes reference from our favorite mechanic in the series, Thracia Fog of War. As I demonstrate here, when you walk into the end of a path, it either reveals the next cave, or just sends you right back to the center of your current cave. There's no puzzle as to figuring out which path is correct, you just kind of stumble across the map, fighting mini bursts of enemies in small rooms on your way to the ending. Now, I don't blame anyone for finding this experience frustrating or tedious, but I'm gonna be honest, I low-key really enjoyed it. I'm already vaguely familiar with the map layout, but I didn't look it up, and I had a fun time trying to figure out the fastest route to the boss room while also going through each cave. Of course, fighting more enemies means more experience, and I did enjoy the micromaps that each cave presented, using our 2 combat units and refresher unit to handle a variety of simple but engaging enemy formations. The main incentive to fight every room, though, is the existence of chests in every one, and resources are quite scarce in Revelation, so you take everything you can get. There's no time incentive for them, and we get keys to open them rather than having to escort a frail thief to them, so the main challenge that these chests provide is the cluster of enemies protecting them. As mentioned, I enjoyed engaging with these groups of enemies, but I'll admit that's only because I was also giving myself the additional challenge of minimal turn counts. If your goal is just to collect all the chests and defeat the boss, then there's not much of a challenge presented by the chests. The avatar can pretty easily just sit at the choke points with the Dragonstone, and at that point, it's mostly just up to tedium to walk around. One might expect this to just be a flaw in this map's design, but rewards scattered across a map with only vaguely threatening enemies guarding them is actually a big philosophy for Revelation side objectives, from my observations. I feel this falls somewhere between Birthright and Conquest, in which the enemies you have to defeat are stronger than Birthright, but not quite as strong as Conquest, while also not having a time incentive. There are a couple challenging recruitments, or recruited characters you need to protect, like we saw in Awakening Chapter 5. I'd speculate that these work very well, and I do enjoy trying to fit the tedious side objectives into a fast-paced clear. The recruitments aren't super common though, and the fast pace is completely self-imposed, so as a whole, I don't feel Revelation's approach in of itself works very well. After a long time winding our way to the north, we actually re-encounter Gunter. He apparently survived his fall into the bottomless canyon in Chapter 3, and just by existing gives us a huge boost to the size of our army. With Gunter, I'm able to get through the final rooms a bit more quickly, utilizing his high movement and having another unit to do pair-up separate strats with. Having already wrapped around the west, we cut back through the center and take on the final optional cave in the east. This one is by far the largest, with 5 whole enemies to deal with. Of course, they're distributed pretty far from each other, so I basically can take them on 1 or 2 at a time, before picking up the final chest and running back north to reach the boss room. The generic enemies up there are just as simple as the rest, and I tried to leave a samurai alive to let Azura get the kill on enemy phase, since she's actually pretty strong after all the singing she did on the map. Frustratingly, they were given a droppable vulnerary, and will use it if at low HP. You still get all its uses once obtaining it, but on premise I feel I must be upset by this healing AI, which is truly the one bad aspect of this map. Queen is able to 2-shot the boss with the Dragonstone, staying safe even in the chance of a crit, thanks to guard gauge and the Dragonstone's defensive buff. Azura got the samurai kill on the final enemy phase, and Queen was set to seize. I'm not sure I took the exact fastest path in the end, but for a somewhat blind attempt, I am pretty proud of getting all the chests and seizing in just 30 turns. As sad as that sounds. Shadows of Valentia. Alm leads his group to the Deliverance hideout. Once again, we get a glimpse at Python before heading into the dungeon. There's a lot more going on, but at the same time, there's technically nothing we have to do, as all the various encounters scattered across the dungeon are completely optional. Going straight to the shrine, we encounter not just Clive and Forsyth, but also Fernand, who throws a huge fit at Clive passing down his title as leader to Alm. Fernand and his petty self straight up defects to the other side, but this is actually a good thing, because it leads to the introduction of Shadows of Valentia's added villain, Berkut, who, as you might guess, I like a whole lot. After recruiting Clive and Forsyth, we head back to recruit Python, giving us our 3rd new unit. Clive will be a lot less relevant this run, since we already have Cavalier Cliff, but his high movement and decent bulk will be useful in the upcoming battle. Python won't be particularly strong anytime soon as a slow, inaccurate archer, but he'll have some great late game performance. Forsyth, on the other hand, will never really have a moment to shine, but only because I chose to take the upcoming dungeon encounters to train other units instead. In Gaiden, I did one encounter before Sophia Gate because it was forced, and one after to push some units to promotion. Here though, I have some specific goals I'd like to reach before Sophia Gate. I end up spending 8 turns across 3 battles, letting Lucas sweep one side of each encounter in 2 turns, while everyone else teamed up against the other, getting some kills for Silk and my other units of choosing on player phase. In the end, I spent less turns than in Gaiden, and spending the 8 turns will absolutely be worth it, warping what options we have available for the upcoming battle. Yes, not only did I get Lucas to level 7 and ready to promote, but I also got Silk to her long-awaited level 7, finally earning Warp. Its limited range makes it weaker than in Gaiden, but the difference is that we actually have a strong unit to be warped forward in Mage Faye. After the encounters, I returned to the shrine, giving one attack fountain to Silk to boost her warp range, but the other go to Faye, no questions asked. Having completed our time in the Deliverance hideout, it's finally time to reclaim Sophia Castle. As always, our objective is to rout, but Desai with his droppable Draco Shield and Slade are secretly tied to each other, and defeating one causes the other to flee. We failed to get the Draco Shield in Gaiden, but this time we're fully prepared to take on the challenge. Before we get to Desai, we've got to deal with the archers shooting down on us in the east, some archers that were added behind the door in the west, and of course Slade and his cavalry. Last time the archers caused a lot of problems, but we need not worry, as Silk is able to warp Faye up to them turn 2, who's able to one-round both archers over 2 player phases, while killing the soldier on enemy phase. In equipping the leather shield, she also tanks quite well, and turn 3, I warped Alma up for their support bonus and supplies access. In the west, I led with my own archers, who needed a turn wheel use to actually land their attacks, but once they successfully defeated the enemy archers, Claire was free to open the door. From there, Cliff ran forward and baited Slade's group. This time, he and his cavalry all charged at once, but because I have 2 cavaliers of my own, I was able to make a 3-tile choke point with Cliff, Clive, and Lucas. Thankfully, the archers kept moving up front, while Slade continued to get body blocked, so I was able to take out the archers on player phase, while getting some chip damage on the cavaliers on the enemy phase. Gray and the archers were super helpful in getting damage off behind the choke point, with Gray and Lucas often teaming up for kills. They each one-rounded the archers, but as we learned in Gaiden, hit rates are pretty rough thanks to the 20 avoid tiles, so I basically just assumed that I would only be landing half of my attacks here. Faye also helped, distracting some of the cavaliers in the east. She didn't double, but she was able to 2-shot them. After a few turns, I finished off the generic enemies, timing up with Slade getting healing AI. As our last hurdle before Desai, Lucas baited and killed the Arcanist, while Faye one-rounded the archer. Now, it is finally time for Desai. The most obvious challenge in defeating Desai is his insane bulk. With the Draco Shield's plus 13 buff to his defenses on top, every unit does 0 damage, but Gaiden and its remake have a minimum damage of 1, so we can slowly chip him to death, assuming we can survive long enough. The process is made even longer by the plus 5 HP he heals at the start of every turn, thanks to the Draco Shield, and I believe he also gets healing AI, which we need to avoid at all costs. As such, I always trap him at this one tile where he's blocked off by walls on his sides, and have one unit blocking him from above and below. This run, I have Clive wrap around and block him off from the north, with Lucas in the south. To keep Slade alive, I have Cliff trap him in the supplies room, and while I don't have a second healer to keep him at full HP, I do have Claire, who is able to fly over the walls, delivering food from the supplies to whoever needs them. It takes a handful of turns, but I'm slowly able to outpace his healing, with the 2 archers, Faye, Alm, and Gray, being able to attack for 1x2 with ranged attacks. Like Gaiden, this is really one of the few side objectives that Shadows of Valentia has. You could technically count the overworld quests, but those typically just encourage the player to do more battles or explore dungeons, rather than come up with different strategies for the battles themselves. The lack of side objectives is absolutely impactful, negative even, but I will say that this Draco Shield fight is pretty cool in my opinion. Provisions, turn wheel, and an additional unit make it actually reasonable, and it requires quite the unique strategy. I suppose it's a little tedious once you have the setup, but the point is it forces you to make a setup that can reliably survive an extended period of time while still having productive damage output. My attempt only actually takes 6 or so turns, and I'm ultimately able to set up the kill for Silk. She already reached level 7 for Warp, but I'm not quite done with her training arc just yet, since the promotion to Saint mid-Act 3 can be very useful. After Silk rightfully claims her Draco Shield, Faye gets the final kill, getting an Alm support crit on the Knight for good measure. Sophia Castle is saved, and we are all done with the first act. Looking at our team, I'm honestly really happy with how everyone turned out. Silk being so speedy was awesome, and really helped accelerate her journey to Warp. Getting Lucas to Knight a bit early is great, and I'm even able to promote Cliff to Paladin here, who will be able to use our new Rider's Bane we get from exploring Sophia Castle to great avail in the next battles. Of course, the highlight of Act 1 was clearly Mage Faye, and I'm looking forward to her continued dominance as she unlocks more spells, already getting Seraphim at the end of Sophia Gates. I'm a little sad to part ways with this awesome cast of units, but at the same time, I'm excited to move on to the next act, where an even greater cast awaits. Three Houses. Our next mission is to help suppress a rebellion against the Church of Seros, led by the Fargus Lord, Leonardo. Unlike Queen's suppression of the Ice Tribe in Conquest, we're actually given some assistance here. Catherine, a powerful knight of Seros and wielder of the legendary relic weapon, Thunderbrand. The month leading up to the mission is pretty simple, with me choosing Explore every week to maximize our early Professor rank gains. Before exploring though, I go ahead and promote all our units that reached level 5 in the last battle. These beginner promotions give very minor boosts, but giving a head start on their class masteries will be very useful, as we'll see in a couple parts. A huge element that our first week exploring unlocks is the Battalion Guild. In equipping a battalion, our units can get a variety of boosts to their damage, defenses, hits, crit, and avoid. Kind of like the stat boosting rings in Genealogy, but even more impactful. Each battalion also has its own gambit, which, as we saw last time, lets them attack a certain range once or twice per battle, stunning the enemies it hits. Through the Battalion Guild, though, we are able to expand our collections of battalions past the 3 we had last time, also gaining access to some battalions with support gambits. Another cool element unlocked is Mission Assistance, which lets us bring any one unrecruited student to our battles that month, though they won't gain any experience, and we can't interact with their inventories. This month, I choose Ash from the Blue Lions. Most players don't give him a very flattering assessment, but I think he has a lot of strengths that can easily make him a high-performing unit if you know what you're doing. We won't get to start training him quite yet, but we'll technically gain some support points with him here, and accurate bow chip is always useful in the early game. He's also got some tie-ins with this chapter's mission, being the adoptive son of Leonardo, so I only feel it's fitting that we bring him along. Another notable moment is the Fish of Mystery event. It's rare, but here we get the opportunity to fish for the Goddess Messenger. I take over an hour resetting for 2, earning 100 Professor experience each, letting me reach my goal of C Professor rank. Moving on to our mission, we see that the enemies have summoned a layer of fog, everyone's favorite mechanic. An important aspect of the map is our allied army, consisting of Catherine and 2 generic Myrmidons. Catherine is an incredibly powerful swordmaster, but her allies are more on par with our units. Looking at the rest of the map, we can assume that our goal will be to reach the northwest corner, but until then, we've got some assorted infantry units hidden in the fog, paired with everyone's favorite enemy, Poison Strike Archers. As a side goal, the game tells us that we'll be rewarded for keeping Catherine's allies alive, and as my own personal goal, I'd like to avoid Catherine from charging forward and stealing all the kills for herself. The fog makes a fast-paced approach tricky, but I have plenty of experience with this map, so I generally know what to expect. Starting off, I have Lintard to use the support gambit Stride on Queen. This gives the insane boost of +5 movement to all units within 2 spaces of its target, making for an incredible turn 1 tool that lets most of our army jump the enemies and immediately get to faraway places. With the movement boost, Queen is just barely able to make it to a forest tile all the way in the west, using a torch to reveal all the enemies in the immediate area. After Dorothea and Ferdinand apply their rallies, Caspar uses a gambit on the first fighter, also hitting the archer a couple tiles back. Edelgard finishes the fighter, while Hubert runs into the forest and finishes off the archer with Frozen Lance. With the first group of enemies already dealt with, I was set to start handling the enemies in the center of the map turn 2. Through leaving a Myrmidon alive in the southern forest, Catherine had a target to not just distract her, but leave her in the middle of the forest, stalling the future movement of Catherine and her allies, who will always move to be next to her if they don't have an attack target. As such, I'm pressed to defeat the enemies that went after Queen on enemy phase on turn 2, but the enemies were kind enough to form a formation that set up Edelgard's Blaze Gambit to hit them all. Some of my units were a little stuck in the southern forest with Catherine, but I still had Sylvain and Caspar to pick off some kills. In the south, Hubert attacked an archer in the forest at one range with Banshee, freezing them in place thanks to Banshee's -5 movement debuff. From turn 1, we've seen this Dark Mage in the central group of forests, who serves as a sort of mini-boss. Turn 4, I have Queen use the Assembly Gambit, which pulls Queen and her attack target back one tile, getting the Dark Mage on a forest tile rather than a thicket. Between this and the damage from the Gambit, Edelgard picks up the kill, triggering a cutscene. It is revealed that the Dark Mage was the one conjuring the fog, and with them defeated, the rest of the map is revealed. We see that there actually aren't that many enemies left, and we can basically just continue baiting them over in their groups of 2 or 3, then finish off getting the 2 or 3 shots on player phase. Ashe, Linhardt, Bernadetta, and Ferdinand stay behind to defeat the few enemies coming from the northeast, but otherwise everyone else gets hit with our second stride, turn 5, easily letting us outpace Catherine, ensuring both the safety of her allies and that we can get all the kills. While the protecting an allied army side objective went pretty well this run, I have to say that I typically do not enjoy the implementation of such objectives in Three Houses, and this one is no exception. Here, the unpredictability of the AI can be pretty punishing, and future iterations give small chances for weak allies to die before you have a reasonable chance to defeat them. Conceptually though, they all encourage the player to put together a faster paced strategy, in the same vein as chess and enemies with droppable items that run away. Interestingly enough though, Three Houses does not feature villages, but in effect, its chests basically serve the same purpose. With cheap, purchasable chest keys, you can basically just have your strongest unit charge forward, easily meeting the time incentive without having to escort a frail thief. On the other hand, many chests and droppable items don't actually have a time incentive, but take the challenging enemy formation approach. However, as the game progresses into a series of defeat commander maps that are reasonable to defeat without engaging with the full map, the side objectives feel far more challenging than the victory condition, but not at all worth taking on, with rewards like a killer lance and a singular piece of umbral steel, making little to no impact on future clears. Like Revelation, I actually enjoy taking on these somewhat egregious side objectives under my personal goal of fully completing a map in minimal turns, in which I add the additional restriction of banning purchasable chest keys altogether. Putting together strategies that quickly escort thieves to chests is actually pretty engaging, but I recognize the game itself doesn't actually encourage the player to do this. Still, in giving myself these restrictions, Ashe gets to be quite the important unit with his personal skill Lockpick, so while he's stuck as a mission assistant here, look forward to seeing some cool Ashe action soon. After pushing past the diagonal wall of enemy Gambit users and the final fighter duo, we're set to handle Lonato. For the first turn, Edelgard gets a little damage in on player phase, but Lonato just heals it all back and gets an opportunity to use his Gambit on Edelgard. He's got low hits and misses though, and I'm able to defeat him all in the final player phase anyways. Hubert uses his 3-range Mire, applying a -5 defense debuff, which combined with some chip damage from Queen, Edelgard, and Caspar, sets up the kill for Sylvain, getting to level 7 with Professor's Guidance. Having saved the green units, we are rewarded with a secret book and goddess icon. These rewards don't really match the challenge at face value, but they'll add minor boosts to consistency as early as the next chapter, with a particularly challenging boss fight, so I'll take it. Fire Emblem. Engage! After saving the Firenaise village from Corrupted, we are briefly introduced to the young girl, Vale, who will be popping in and out of the story on occasion these next few chapters. We explore the town a bit, and then bring the shopkeeper Anis and armorer Durthon back with us to the Somniel. The shop lets us buy tonics, and unlike Awakening, we have one available for each stat, giving more flexibility in stat manipulation, but pressure in deciding when is best to use the tonic. For various reasons, they're at their most impactful in the next 2 chapters, so I just go ahead and buy all of them now. The armory isn't quite as interesting, but getting more accurate weapons and more range options is nice. We also unlock some other Somnial features, such as the Training Grounds, where we can do a stressful minigame for a temporary stat boost for Queen. More importantly, we unlock the Ring Chamber, and we can now start creating bond rings for our units that don't have emblem rings. Their stat boost is minor, but they can still make a meaningful impact on the unit's performance. They also let units gain SP, even without an emblem ring, albeit only getting half as much. SP grows with EXP, and in accumulating enough, we can inherit certain skills from emblems, using them even without that emblem equipped. Anyone familiar with Engage will probably know that inheriting Sigurd's Cantor is a popular strategy, and while I'd argue it's not a perfect fit for every playstyle, it definitely is for mine, so rushing units to the requisite 1000 SP will be one of my main objectives in the upcoming maps. With Princess Saline now in tow, we head back to Fiorne Castle, but find that it is under attack, with forces led by the not-so-friendly Zephyia. They are after the Celica emblem ring, and a conflict soon breaks out. After revealing the return of Sombron in Illusia, Zephyia leaves, and our goal is now to defeat her henchman, Niluce. There are a decent amount of enemies on the path to the north, but there are also some scattered about in the west. This path not only leads to an alternative door to the boss room, but also features a couple chests in the far northwest corner, threatened by a nearby thief. To reach them in time, we'll need to rely on our powerful emblem rings. I'm leaving Sigurd on Queen, as I'll likely be doing for the rest of the early game, since our long-term Sigurd user won't join us until much later. As the face of my unit's emblem pairing philosophy, Marth goes to Chloe. A basic choice, but it is both fitting and high-performing. Speaking of high-performing, my choice for the Celica ring this run will be the Crown Prince of Fiorne himself, Alfred. As some have pointed out, he's got some similar personality traits to Alm, but the connection I'm going for here is Conrad, with both being a royal cavalier brother to the Celica figure. I'm bending the rules here a bit, but there are some cool interactions with Alfred in his personal class and the Celica ring that I'd like to show off, starting this very chapter. Our first task is to clear out the enemies that surround our starting position. I have Queen set up the archer kill for Chloe, then I set up the knight kill for Alfred, utilizing Clan's magic and Boucheron's chain attacks. If you leave Celica on Saline, or even give her to Clan, you get a unit that can one-round these extremely physically defensive knights, but it's not like you need to one-round knights, as demonstrated here. After Chloe narrowly survives the enemy phase against the sword fighters, we've got a pretty involved player phase going on. Our damage output against the speedy sword fighters isn't great, but I'm just barely able to team up for the kills. Most are 3 shots, but by engaging with Marth and getting divine speed, Chloe is able to finish the sword fighter that Alfred weakened on enemy phase herself. Alfred also engages here, using Echo to finish off a sword fighter, while also getting some chip damage on the axe fighter while holding a choke point. Turn 3, it's time to chase after the thief in the west. The enemies have conveniently formed a line in the hallway, and by engaging with Sigurd, Queen is able to reach them, using Override to hit them all and end up at the other side. We've already unlocked Momentum, giving us an extra point of damage for every tile moved, which, combined with the Dragon Tag damage bonus, lets her just straight up Oko the thief. Queen isn't able to survive the remaining enemies though, so I have Alfred warp Ragnarok over there, finishing off the fighter and blocking off the other enemies from reaching Queen. Chloe's group in the south has another tense player phase, but they're able to take out the nearby sword fighters while setting up a formation that protects anyone from dying to the remaining sword fighter and archer. Back in the northwest, Alfred does a great job in finishing off the enemies, with Divinely Inspiring and the Magic Tonic letting him kill the knights. By turn 4 enemy phase, all that was left was the archer, with Queen setting up the kill for Alfred with the accurate Seraphim. By turn 5, the southern group had finished the enemies and broken down the door, and the northern group was set to open the chests, rest at the emblem energy, then rejoin with the rest of the army for the boss fights. This clear reflects really well for engaged side objectives, which are functionally similar to other games in providing a time incentive, but are designed with specific use cases of the emblem rings in mind. For example, Warp Ragnaroking Saline in Chapter 4 lets you protect the new recruits and village, and using a well-timed override here in Chapter 5 lets you chase after the thief. I have to say though that this is the highlight for side objectives in Engage. As our available tools expand and change, maps are less capable of accommodating of having side objectives solved by using specific tools, and they become more generic. There's a decent variety, but Engage is missing stealing, tense enemy recruitment, and escorting thieves to chests, as anyone can open them. Like Three Houses, I feel the solution for many side objectives in the mid-game is to just throw your strongest unit out there. Once you get to the late game, it's possible to have a winning pace that's actually too fast for any of the objectives meant to serve as time incentives, and the rewards are not impactful on your ability to continue such a pace for the rest of the game. Again, I think the most engaging side objectives come from the optional paralogs, though this time, players are guaranteed to be able to play them all. Optional enemies dropping gold is a nice approach to rewards, as the player can spend it as they see fit. Overall, I wouldn't say Engage has bad side objectives, but they're not as interesting as they seem at first, and definitely fit under the concept of challenge for the sake of challenge, in my opinion. Turn 8, Queen re-engages with Sigurd, galloping over to clean up the last group of generic enemies, Okoing an axe fighter with a Rider's Bane. Saline finishes one sword fighter, and Chloe kills the other, using her new Break Defenses skill to get an extra attack after breaking an enemy. Turn 9, the boss group approaches. After Clan weakens the Martial Monk by forcing them to use their Chain Guard, Queen hit them with her second override, Okoing both her and the Cavalier with the Rider's Bane. Chloe finishes the other Cavalier with the Rider's Bane that a knight dropped earlier, and Alfred engages with Celica, warping over to trap the boss in place. We're now introduced to Revival Stones, which basically give bosses multiple health bars, making them tough to beat in just one player phase. Emblem attacks are a solid answer, with high damage output and avoiding counterattacks, but because of a certain crit Chloe got earlier, her emblem meter just barely didn't get refilled, and I had to put together kills without it. Thankfully, we have Boucheron, whose chain attacks add up to a significant amount of damage. With him, Clan is able to set up the first kill for Chloe, and after attacking with Queen and Saline, the final kill goes to Alfred. While he may not be the most obvious fit for Celica, having a high movement, bulky unit with tome access warping around proved to be very useful in fully clearing the map at a fast pace, and I'm looking forward to their continued awesome performance going forward. And that wraps up part 4 of the Sync Marathon and our look into the many side objectives in the series. While other topics have shown a clear change in direction over the years, I found that most games have consistently used similar forms and applications of side objectives, and their success varies not just by the context of the game, but also the context of the chapter. As such, it's difficult to pinpoint any trends of change in my qualifiers, but we can make a few broad observations when comparing each game's general approaches to each other. For one, I think it's safe to say that every game, barring Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia, have consistently included side objectives that give a gentle push in pace. In doing so, players are given an incentive to look past the typically simple, slow strategies and more precisely consider elements like movement and damage calculations. While this may seem obvious, I think it's worth pointing this approach out as a standard application rather than an inherent aspect of side objectives. Secondly, while the forms have been pretty consistent, there are a few nuanced changes I'd like to point out. Villages could briefly only be visited by the Lord, but this soon opened up to allowing any unit to visit. Likewise, chests have had a long history of only being opened by frail thieves, but this has expanded over time, between chest keys, skills like Lock Touch in a game with reclassing, or even just removing the thief restriction entirely. Optional recruitments have also become less of a side objective and more of a feature of maps, as the games transitioned from large casts of replaceable units to a smaller group of developed characters. These nuanced changes serve to open up the strategies that players can deploy, not needing to send specific units to certain parts of maps. However, I feel that in the case of thieves and recruitments, the objectives are now missing out on what made them engaging in the first place, and the games need to be a bit more creative when using historically successful forms. In this regard, I'll point out Birthright, Three Houses, and Engage as lowlights for engaging side objectives. Completing a chapter generally equates to also completing side objectives, since you don't need to escort specific units to specific areas and have a calculated follow-up. Thanks to power creep, the games give you the tools to basically just send your strongest units forward and reap the rewards on their own. While I had a rough time with the game, I would actually point out Thracia as a highlight for engaging side objectives, with the caveat of having some foreknowledge. There are a lot of tense recruitments, chests and villages that genuinely push the player to use their limited tools in more aggressive approaches, and green units that get the player to go beyond just move forward and kill enemies. Capturing and stealing also puts a big emphasis on calculated player phases, and being able to reliably set up a capture or have a follow-up after the frail thief steals. Other highlights include Conquest, with many rewards locked behind well-designed, challenging enemy formations, and even Shadows of Valentia, if we just look at this part. It's basically all the game has to offer, but the Draco Shield does present a specific challenge that gets the player to think past the victory condition, while actually giving them the resources to make the challenge reasonable. When it comes to rewards, I'll again point out many of the modern games as lowlights. In particular, Awakening, Birthright, Three Houses, and Engage feature mid and late games where players commonly just have one unit sweep everything with generic equipment, or rush bosses on defeat commander maps. As such, side objectives become something you go out of your way for, not really adding challenge, but just to say you got it. On the other hand, I think it's possible for objectives to be too rewarding, as we saw in Thracia and Revelation. Without foreknowledge, there are a lot of extremely powerful tools in Thracia locked behind simple objectives that the player might not expect to be important to complete, and in Revelation, the limited resource context puts too strong of an emphasis on getting its tedious objectives that players should be valid for skipping. I'll bring back Conquest as a highlight, as it consistently matches strong challenges with relevant rewards, even through the late game. As a more specific reference, I think that the GBA games match certain stealing moments well with rare stat boosters and promotion items, and even vulneraries feel like a meaningful steal in Blazing Blade given the limited gold. As stated, I also appreciate the incremental systems incorporated in Genealogy, and to a greater extent, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. In rewarding gold or bonus XP depending on the player's exact pace, I feel objectives can more strongly fill the role of encouraging more thoughtful strategies, while still leaving many valid options available. I already pointed out how the titles have generally used the same forms and applications of side objectives, just in different ways. However, I'd speculate that Thracia has the most variety, with thoughtful stealing and capturing, on top of pace-setting villages, recruitable enemies, escorting green units, and basically everything else. Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are also capable of allowing for a wide variety of optional challenges thanks to the bonus experience system, though I think that Radiant Dawn has a stronger implementation of rewarding objectives past low turn counts. I'm confident though that Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia have the least variety, with only a couple challenging optional bosses with droppable items. Altogether, I recognize that the success of a side objective is largely dependent on the context of a map and not just the game, but if we make some generalizations, I'd say my favorite approaches to side objectives come from Thracia, Radiant Dawn, and Conquest. Despite my frustrations with Thracia in practice, I think it has a lot of solid ideas going for its objectives in concept. Both Thracia and Radiant Dawn are boosted with some foreknowledge, but since I had it, I really enjoyed Radiant Dawn, directly rewarding turn counts and various unique objectives with an incremental amount of bonus XP. I don't feel Conquest even requires foreknowledge though, consistently providing players challenges that are well conveyed, match the context of the game, and give rewards with specific, meaningful impacts on future gameplay. Now, I'll admit that most of the modern games didn't get a great review because I mostly took into account the required chapters and not the optional paralogs, where, ironically, all the great side objectives seem to be locked behind. We'll start doing those in the next part, so look forward to that alongside some other cool moments coming up. In Path of Radiance, we'll finally be able to distribute bonus experience to our units and recruit a familiar, powerful ally. In Three Houses, we'll take on the legendary Death Knight for the first time. And of course, in Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia, we'll start Act 2 and get our magic units of choosing to begin their rise to the top. Until then, make sure to vote for the next part's topic in the community section, and if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. I've really enjoyed hearing what other players think about the run and their own thoughts on the topics, and I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on Fire Emblem's many side objectives down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.